Good morning and welcome to Gunner Shot. It's indeed a matter of great pride and honor that I'm going to converse with two of my seniors, Dr. John Helmer and Brig Arun Sahgal. I'm going to discuss of what's happening in this world. A lot of things happening, right? Ships are being boarded in mid-Atlantic. You could call it piracy. Some would call it, boarding for illegal ships. That's one part of the story. That's debatable. You having arsenic fired all over again in the western part of Ukraine. It's got its own issues. You have America, excising its power all over, and Mr. Trump wants to take over Denmark. Whether Denmark likes it or wants to take over
Greenland.
Greenland. Whether Denmark likes it or not, or for that matter, Greenland likes it or not. And it appears as of now, no one can stop him from doing what he wants to do. And all this is happening. You have things going southwards in Iran. Iran is going through a revolution. Today is the 15th day, and things are going back to worse. And this is a kind of a revolution which we've not seen in its 47-year-old history ever since Ayatollah Khomeini came back from France and took over the country. At the same time, China is, being driven to a corner, and you see the Chinese papers these days or their media. What China was, a lot of triumphalism, say about a month back, a lot of whining today in China. At the same time, in India, we are facing probably some of the toughest times in terms of decision making, not in any other thing. Which way do we head? Where, on one hand, we see China trying to re enter our market, and to some extent, as part of the normalization, we in India appear to be saying, okay, come in, and we need that to some extent. On the second hand, you see, Russia or equation with Russia, though stable, is under heavy pressure from USA and its threat to put 500% tariffs on oil exports from Russia, and it's going to hit us. On the third hand, you have a new narrative coming out of USA that it was India which didn't go for the deal, and it is India which missed the deadline. It's a narrative. It's a false narrative, but it is that, and it puts the India-US relationship on a limb. On a limb because it's taken us 25 years to develop a strategic relationship, and it's just taken 1 year ever since the new Trump administration has come to break that relationship. It's no more strategic. There's a relationship though. So with this kind of a thing, India finds itself in a new paradigm. But that's the way we look at it. How do others look at it? And we'll go and get a perspective from the way Moscow looks at it and its worldview. And we'll get an idea of that from Dr. John Helmer first, and then we'll get uh, a counter view, or I wouldn't say a counter view, a conjoint view, if I may say, from Brigadier Sahgal later. First, let me defer the floor to Dr. John Helmer. John, all yours.
Thank you, Ravi. I think we all specialize here in conjoined views, and these are very complicated topics. And let's try to see how they interact in a way that perhaps those who read the press, both in India, Russia, and elsewhere, can't readily understand or need some additional interpretation to understand. How to begin? In the first place, you've spoken, we've spoken, Arun has spoken in some detail about the problem, strategic problem of how one maintains escalation control between adversaries, short of war and in war. And what we now have from a Russian point of view, or looking at the Russian situation, I'll come to the interpretations in a minute, is a most serious problem of loss of escalation control to the Trump administration. Trump personally is now engaged in rhetorical, verbal humiliation. That's in a personal humiliation. He's also involved in attacking the person of the Russian president. And just as you said, Ravi, Prime Minister Modi's been subjected to the same. And we'll get back to the way in which Howard Lutnick, the Commerce Secretary, lied about the negotiations between the US and India on trade, and the way in which Trump intended to be humiliating and provocative in his recent remarks about Prime Minister Modi and the Apache helicopter deal. But let's come back to that a little later. That's propaganda warfare, but it's part of an underlying or overlying American strategy of regime change. And you summarized pretty well, Ravi, regime change sponsored by the US around the world. But let me focus on the problems and the sequence of military facts on the ground from a Russian point of view. In the first place, we had a few days ago, the series began with the 40 drone attack on President Putin's personal residence in the Novgorod area, in the northwest of Russia, near Lake Valdai. In the first place, it was announced to Trump by Putin. That implies that Putin was drawing the president of the United States' attention to something he didn't know, and he didn't. He admitted it. Then he lied about it, and the Western press lied about it by saying that the attack never happened. So the Russian response was to have the chief of the military intelligence, Admiral Kostyakov, present the data that had been decoded from one of the drone controllers that had been salvaged to prove that the targeting had been the presidential residence and the associated military facility, which is a nuclear command control bunker, which is always wherever the president of Russia is, as it is with all significant leaders in all countries. Finally, despite the CIA denials, it's now been admitted by the US that there had been an attack on a military facility nearby. And there's no doubt that the US assisted in the targeting, the identification of the coordinates, the manipulation of the flights of the drones to avoid or evade Russian air defense in order to strike. That was the first major attack. I think we've talked about it before. It's been described by Russian officials as state terrorism, terrorism employed by the Ukraine, and with the implication that the US and NATO intelligence was directly and explicitly engaged. That was the first attack, and it's unprecedented for the US to attack in that way. Then there was the Caracas attack and the kidnapping of President Maduro, and that has triggered the following exchange, which I'd like to mention and read out exactly. When President Trump was asked about this on January the 8th by one of his Fox News favorites, he was asked a couple of things that have become most difficult. I'm looking down and quoting from the paper. Vladimir Putin, we did take out this Russian flag tank along with Great Britain. Trump says, right. Tough decision, number one. Number two, says the interviewer. Trump, I didn't think it was a tough decision. Interviewer, you support the sanctions bill. I think there are 85 or 84 senators that want. Trump, yeah, only if they only do it if it's subject to me, and I support it. What support do you use? I hope we don't have to use it. And we have big sanctions on Russia right now. Russia's economy is very bad. They are much bigger than Ukraine. They're much bigger, more powerful. Question, listen to this. Vladimir called you after this tanker was seized. I don't want to say that, but the fact is that the Russian ships, it was a submarine and a destroyer, they both left very quickly when we arrived. We took over the ship and the oil is being unloaded now. That's what Trump said on the 8th. I'll leave aside the falsehoods. I'll come back to that in a minute. But he's been asked also whether he would consider doing to Putin what he'd just done to Maduro. And he was specifically, question on January the 9th, next day. Just one more on topic question. President Zelensky said he was watching with the rest of the world as he made this order to go in and capture Nicolas Maduro. And he said, that's Zelensky, if that's how it works with dictators, then the United States knows what to do next. It sounds like he wants you to go capture Vladimir Putin. Would you ever order a mission to go and capture Vladimir Putin? Trump quotes, well, I don't think it's going to be necessary. I think we're going to have, I've always had a great relationship with him. I'm very disappointed. And then he goes on about why he's disappointed, how many people get killed in the battlefield and so on. Now, what is the Russian interpretation of these remarks? These are express statements of a personal, provocative kind against the head of the Russian state. He's even saying two things. One, we beat the Russian Navy in our operation against a Russian flag tanker, and we might and do consider kidnapping President Putin, but it won't be necessary. And exactly what he means by won't be necessary, he can't and doesn't elaborate. Now, those are provocations of a very, very grave kind. And they followed the Caracas attack and then the boarding of the Mariner tanker, which had been reflagged. Those are the, as it were, military facts on the ground. And give me a bit of a minute. I'll try to explain, as you know better than me, what happens in a military for the last 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years when the national standard has been captured. Okay, the flag carried around the monarch or the senior general on a battlefield must never be captured. The field is lost in medieval and ancient warfare terms when the flag is captured. Kings can be replaced, killed and replaced, but flags represent the nation or the kingdom or the side fighting on the battlefield. Now, what happened with the Marinera or the Mariner tanker? What happened was that the Ministry of Transport in Russia announced that it had given reflagging permission. Whether it was temporary or permanent didn't matter. The vessel had been reflagged, re-registered as Russian when it was underway. The foreign ministry then told the United States, leave it alone. It's ours. We will defend the flag. But it didn't. And what happened was that there was obviously some coordination and some discoordination between the decision to reflag as a Russian vessel and the conclusions on the Russian side by the general staff of what's necessary to defend the flag, to defend the tanker. So what was then deployed was a submarine and a corvette, not a destroyer, as Trump said. Trump is then saying they got to the vessel too slowly and we acted quicker than they were capable of acting to board it. That raises the question of why the Russian Air Force wasn't deployed quicker than the Navy to overfly the vessel and signal it was going to protect it. Such overflights, there have been lots of incidents of Russian Air Force overflights, including overflights of US vessels, to warn them, to indicate that, that they're intruding on Russian property or a Russian defense that will be defended with force. So what we then have is an episode with the Mariner vessel of loss of escalation control, which Trump has rubbed in, as it were, to the Russian side, and that hurts. Second, it's not the only vessel that was reflagged. A product tanker, chemical product, petroleum product tanker that was smaller than the Mariner, called the Hyperion, was also Russian reflagged on January the 5th. It's now proceeding in the mid-Atlantic, heading towards Ust-Luga, the Russian oil port and products port near St. Petersburg. It's not been intercepted. It's not been targeted. Trump has lied about the Mariner. It was empty. It was not full of oil. But never mind. You have one reflagging that escaped, one reflagging that was intercepted, but both mean and raise a question which is factional politics in Moscow. When you reflag, what has the state, the army, the military, the general staff, and the president decided to do to defend the flag? And is it enough to maintain escalation control in relation to the United States with this episode? What we then have seen, and this is worth mentioning, is while the foreign ministry took charge of the negotiations to protect the Mariner and deter a US action on the 8th, it even used the word, the foreign ministry used the word, we reject neo-colonial habits, okay? I'm looking down to get the words exactly right. But there were on board mostly Ukrainians, as I understand it, 2 Russians, and at least 2 Indians. 2 Indians have been arrested by the United States. Now, what the foreign ministry then said in its statement was, we call for humane treatment of the Russians. It didn't say all the crew. It didn't say Russians and Indians. There are also 2 Georgians on board. And then what Trump did was to release the 2 Russians, but not the Indians, not the Ukrainians, and not the Georgians. And then what the foreign ministry spokesman, Maria Zakharova, announced on 9th January, so that's yesterday for our audience, we welcome this decision and express our gratitude to the US leadership for releasing the 2 Russian citizens from the crew of the Mariner tanker. Now, that's extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary. It has never, in my experience, and I used to read as a boy, as many of us have, pirate stories. The victims of piracy never thank the pirate for letting them go. Never did Captain Hook and Peter Pan, sworn enemies, ever thank each other. No, Peter Pan cut Captain Hook's arm off. That's why he had a hook. There's a very interesting story, and it's truer than Captain Hook and Peter Pan, of how ancient Rome in imperial days dealt with pirates. It's the story of Julius Caesar, and I tell it again because it's a reminder of what one does to pirates. If one defines an action of this kind as piracy and not war against the national flag. Caesar was a young man in his 20s, sailing from Rome to Rhodes, the Greek island, to do some studying of what I can't recall. Turkish pirates, then called Cilicia, around Tartus and Ardana on the Mediterranean, intercepted the vessel and took Julius Caesar, hostage. They then proposed to ransom him because that's the purpose of piracy, right? They proposed to ransom him for 20 silver talents, and he said, that's much too little for a person of my rank. Try 50. What he then did was they raised the money, Caesar was released, and in the next 30 days, what happened? 30 days only, Caesar raised a military force, captured the pirates, and crucified them. Now, what does that story tell us about how Rome handled pirates? And what does it tell us about Zaharova thanking Trump for releasing 2 of the crew? Answer, she may be waiting for the opportunity for a military operation to capture the pirates, that's US Special Forces, and crucify them, metaphorically speaking. Or else, the US, in thanking Trump, has given up escalation control in this particular instance. And it's a bigger instance than simply one vessel because it reflects what's happening in the war between the maritime fleets of the Russian side. There are at least 1,500 tankers in the so-called Dark Fleet. There are 1,500 tankers in the Western Fleet of the top 10 commercial companies. And there are probably another 5,000 tankers, oil and gas, plying the seas. What's happening here is a war between maritime fleets, dividing the world's maritime trade. And Russia's facing an additional threat, not just the flagging of its vessels, but Trump's remarks about Greenland. You mentioned it, Ravi, and I'll stop at this point. Trump has said, we must occupy Greenland because it's surrounded by Russian and Chinese ships. Let's leave aside the exaggeration. What's being said here is US intends to contest not simply a vessel that is running from the Venezuelan blockade. No. It's going to contest the Arctic Sea route, the northern route as it's called in Russia, which is the alternative means for Russia to deliver oil products, gas products across the Arctic seas to India, China, Korea, Japan, and what have you. So what's at stake here is a very big strategic threat at sea, and at the same time, a very big strategic threat to the presidency of Russia from US forces based on the Ukraine battlefield. Now, all of those things, as I've suggested, trigger a reasonable, rational difference of factional opinion in Russia over what's appropriate to restore escalation control, avoid defeatism, and so on. And we can talk a bit more later. I think I've said enough for openers of how the Russian side will come to a new consensus to deal with these strategic threats, because the way Russia comes to that conclusion obviously and directly affects its reliability as a strategic partner for India, and its example will be replicated towards the exactly as we've just mentioned.
Thanks a lot. I think you put a lot of things into context. Very clearly, the pressure today is very squarely on Russia and on India in different spheres or along 2 different lines of action. And at this point of time, China is being, China being the ultimate goal. I've always felt that Trump's ultimate goal is China. But be that as it may, this is the threat Russia is facing, and we know what we are facing. Uh, Sahgal sir, your views on this whole, your take on this whole story, and how is it panning out? And then, of course, we'll get to it as to how should Russia respond and how does India respond. We'll go to that because there is an inherent problem in this entire construct from the emanating from the U.S. Actions.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, John, as usual. Great, comprehensive, detailed understanding of how the Russians are operating and how they have operated. In the recollect, I had sent you in the middle of the night a message to say how they, why are the Russians compromising and why are they not reacting. Okay, so I'll also refer to my notes because I had some to ensure that we are on the, I'd say what I mean. Uh, my first fundamental point is world is moving towards an era of new imperialism. This is an important factor which we need to consider. And what does new imperialism means is from creating spheres of influence, intervention to control. You are now moving towards using military power and other economic power and other resources to control other states, to take over the governance of other states. Uh, and it's also moving towards compellence. So the issue is how do we deal with this situation? Uh, John briefly talked about Greenland, and we just learned this morning that plans are being made for intervention in Greenland, force deployments. Also, the UK Prime Minister is in talks with the Danish people to talk about some via media where American forces can be deployed and kept and be located over there as a first stage. What I would call a soft takeover. So the scenario is becoming grim. The scenario is becoming one in which there are no controls on American power. The geopolitical perspective, particularly of the other two major global competitors, i.e., China and Russia. Russia, we already heard just now how Russia has lost the escalation control, rightly or wrongly. I'm sure there must be some method in the madness, but from the global perspective, at the timing of this indicates that the Russians are in no position economically, politically, and militarily to contest the American unipolarity and new imperialism. As far as the Chinese are concerned, the Chinese, to my mind, are licking their wounds. They're licking their wounds in the sense that they have lost a huge amount of capital, resources, and investments in Venezuela. There is a clear message to the Americans. And if you saw Rubio's statement yesterday, he talked about Brazil, big country which is trying to do business with China. And tomorrow they are moving away from dollars to the yuan. And the fact is that he indicated that China might become a major partner of Brazil. It was not a statement of just an ordinary statement. Couched in this statement was the fact is that the United States is concerned about the dalliance between Brazil and China. A, B. It also indicated in a sort of a negative sort of a way to indicate to the Brazilians that there is a limit to American tolerance, and that Chinese investments or Chinese forays into the southern hemisphere or southern America will not be acceptable to the Americans. So we are seeing the the unfolding of this new imperialistic policy in which United States is very categorically saying that is new Trumpian doctrine. They will not allow anybody to interfere in their spheres of influence. And when we look at Greenland, we also look at the fact is that the Greenland is, by its unilateralism, which is trying to do in Greenland, is also indicative of the part of this unilateralism of the United States in trying to take over territories and spaces which are strategically important. As far as the present scenario is concerned, uh, particularly relating to Venezuela, I like to put two issues on the table. We have to take in cognizance that deal Venezuela is still not a done deal. Venezuela is still up in arms. Uh, Venezuela can go either way. There are reports of infighting going on in Venezuela. There are reports that limitations of the present government to control the guerrillas and other elements who are against the government. So, and so the question is the stability of Venezuela is up in question. How will America bring about that stability? We have seen in the past. They have tried to change governance. They try to raise armies. What we saw in Afghanistan, we saw in Syria, we saw in Iraq. They have never succeeded. So, how much success Trump will get in bringing about stabilization in Venezuela is something which will be seen and studied with a great degree of interest. The next issue is the oil part. Today, New York Times is very critical, and it is clear that discussions that Trump has had with the oil moguls of United States, they are not in a position to invest $10 billion in a country where this is politically unstable. So there are two aspects that emerge of this discourse. One aspect of this discourse is that you can take out a leadership, you can bring about a regime change, but can you control the regime? And can you get the benefits of the regime change? This question also in the fact is that economics and geopolitics are not synonymous at times. They have their own leverages, their own understanding and their own impacts. So let us look at this issue as particularly as a Venezuelan issue or the American attempts at new imperialism as a state of play and not a done deal at this point in time. But what is worrisome is that the other two players, global players, are not showing any ability or the grit to contest this. And this is creating a new scenario of, of American overbearance in the global system. We are seeing what is happening in Iran. We are seeing the American president's announcements and his threats that if something happened to the civilians, he will intervene. And what do Chinese do? They just issue statements. A point was being discussed yesterday with some friends is that China will do something. I said, what is China going to do? What are Chinese capacities of at intervention? So this brings me to the construct of India in this scenario. The fundamental point of India in this scenario is this whole notion of strategic autonomy is up in question. Can you make strategic choices the way you want to do it? Or you will be pressurized? Or how do you deal with the unfolding geopolitical scenario, both in terms of diplomacy, security, and your own economic well-being? A bill has been passed which may tomorrow lead to not 500, let's say 200% sanctions, 300 duties on India for buying Russian oil. Although it is true that the oil is selling at much cheaper rates. So the question comes about is how does the present scenario impact India's strategic autonomy in terms of making its own credible choices? So taking this whole issue into account, the main aspects which we have to deal with is how far will this new imperialism of President Trump carry on? What are the brakes that can be put on this policy of over-grandized uh, occupation of territorial spaces, and trying to create a new empire system. Are there any players? We don't see any. So the situation as things stand today is extremely volatile, uncontrollable, and we have a leader who is without restraint and every day coming up with new statements. And like rightly he said about the statement being by the Commerce Secretary of the United States that India has not called on the American president, and if because of that the deal is not signed, as if India is supposed to do. Countries have to now go to like the old Chinese system, go to Darbar, take off their turban, and beseech the emperor for favors. No, this is not going to happen. And one of the reasons India is particularly vulnerable is that, rightly speaking, despite the discourse in my country, rightly speaking, has decided to stand its ground. It has not. It has not catapult. We have not. We have not allowed ourselves to be moved by. Let's put it this way: the Americans have not been able to make us bend. So, so for India, there are two straightforward options. Is one, carefully shape its geopolitical environment, and I would suggest that India looks at its immediate strategic environment and looks into the immediate areas of keeping the sea lines of communication open, dealing with ASEAN, dealing with West Asia, particularly those states where we are doing business with, look for new economic partnerships, and the most important is get our own house in order, both in terms of administratively, economically, politically, and technologically. I think I'll stop here and wait for your comments.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sir. Both of you have painted a very grim picture of what's coming ahead. Let me make it a little more grimmer than what it is, because there is. Let me touch Russia. Now, besides what Dr. John Helmer has spoken about the strange behavior of Russia, the way it has responded to this whole scene in the North Atlantic, virtually it has given no, it's no response. It's just caving in the way I look at it. To thank the pirate for letting, men off, that way John's put it, is says it all. But Russia has done one more thing which has gone under the radar. Is it started selling engines to Pakistan for the JF-17 for Pakistan to export to other countries. And which other countries is Pakistan is trying to export and tie deals up with? Libya, Azerbaijan, uh, Saudi Arabia, uh,
Egypt.
and Egypt, and Bangladesh. Is there something else happening behind which Russia has had a back chat with USA to, line up with the emperor? There's a question mark which has started touching my brain a few days back. It's not a happy sign for India. I'll put it very bluntly. And the first inclination I started getting it about this is when RT started a Pakistani wing. And today, like RT India, there's a RT Pakistan. It tells a story. So that from an Indian perspective, it is pretty serious. Now let's look at the contours of the new imperialism as we spoke of. It is without contestation is not is an understatement. Uh, the Chinese incompetence comes through on two scores. One, it could do nothing to whatever it had to do in Venezuela. Venezuela is, it just lost Venezuela because Venezuela is layered in not only oil and it's got in power and ports and everything and lost control of Panama. Right? It could do nothing about it, China. and Venezuela was the center of its projected power into South America. And second, it has absolutely left Iran to its own ways and means, which has nothing. And Iran and China have a 25-year agreement, strategic agreement. And despite that, today, 14th day, 15th day of protests out there, and the regime might fall, should fall. I'm very glad if that regime goes. That's a repressive regime for the beautiful people of Iran. But the fact is that China is, supposed to have underwritten Iranian security strategically XYZ. It has done nothing. And it has been doing nothing to help bail out Iran or help Iran. Not now, for the past 3 months. So China has been actually found out. The rest at least have taken a step this way, that way. The problem of the compounding problem of American imperialism is that, as far as Venezuela is concerned, I look at it very simply. Whether when Venezuela, politically something happens or not is not American concern. That's the way the cards have been played. Because USA has outsourced Venezuelan politics to the Venezuelans. And by keeping Delcy Rodriguez in power, it is up to the Venezuelans to do what they want with themselves. But what Mr. Trump has insourced is Venezuelan resources. And the government in power and the government power structure in Venezuela supports this idea because they have power and they're going to get some amount of money out of these resources. But the balance of the resources will go to USA, they're okay. It appears to me that the Venezuelan politicians are up for the highest bidder. And today the highest bidder is USA. And they'll deal with the internal insurgencies, which are not new to Venezuela if you've followed Venezuelan politics over the past century. Venezuela gone, the other dominoes have fallen. Colombia has made peace already with USA. Mexico is making peace. Panama is already in control of USA 100%, notwithstanding the Lakashing ports which are there. And today, lo behold, what do I start reading? Peru has started falling in line with USA completely. And this is a place where China has invested a huge port called Chanke and all that. And the tremors I read are from China. I didn't read anything from Peru. So there is, and all this you put together, and Cuba is put on notice because of lack of Venezuelan oil. There's a consolidation, imperial consolidation in Latin America and North America, or north of South America. Brazil is the last puzzle to fall because anyway, Argentina with Javier Milei is already on one side, of the right side of USA. So that consolidation, I think Trump has achieved with minimal effort. One action in Venezuela, it's done. The next domino to fall or to be taken is Greenland. And then what do we have to see is $1 million question. Because, and of course, a lot of things will revolve around how Iran goes, which way Iran goes. If Iran, the regime falls and it swings towards USA as it will, then we are looking at a completely different scenario and how do we handle this. In this kind of a thing, to expect China to come up and do something is out of question. They'll not. I think it's more than licking their wounds. It will be a long time before they start even thinking strategically. So it comes down to what do I see India doing? India is in the horns of a dilemma. Do you resist USA militarily? You can't. In any case, USA is not interested in militarily dealing with India. It's going to be more of political pressure. It's going to be more of commercial pressure. But at the same time, the other one who offers a modicum of resistance to USA is only Russia. There's no third country after this left who's going to resist USA, and that's where we are. And I think one thing very sure we will see ahead is how USA goes about cutting off the different links between Russia and India. And to some extent, they have been successful. And this is the world we are living in, and we have to see how to handle this whole situation, right? Uh, I don't have answers for it. This things might get even worse from here, and I'm giving a pretty grim situation. So, from this perspective, I'd like your comments on this, John, and to Brigadier Arun Sahgal. Over to you.
Thank you, Ravi. I agree with both of you, and I think our audience ought to be persuaded about how grave and grim the situation is. At the same time, that's a bit of an antidote for the predominantly American podcasters who want to describe Venezuela as a whopping mistake on the United States' part, who want to describe Trump as mad, as the US military as incompetent, and the European allies as fools. We're providing some antidote to that. But I think our audience also wants to understand what happens next, and as you said, what India may do, what Russia may do. Now, I left out an important element that Russia's already done. It's the Oreshnik. In retaliation, officially, for the attack on the presidential residence in Novgorod, the Oreshnik was fired at the Ukrainian European gas storage facility at Stry. It's a place, a very large storage near Lvov, near the Polish border. This attack has been identified as the retaliation for the Novgorod attack, and arguably, from a Russian point of view, it restores escalation on the Ukraine battlefield, and that's the crucial thing. The Russian view now, and we're in the middle of Christmas holiday. There's a silence from the Kremlin for the New Year Christmas holiday, but there's an extremely active debate, the traces of which you can see in the military bloggers and other press, on the fundamental strategic choice here of matching capacity to outcome to deter more US threat. And the doctrine for the time being is one battlefield at a time and recover the benefits of the clock. Let me explain. From a Russian point of view, the use of the Oreshnik and the threat of using more must end the war on the battlefield in Ukraine on Russian terms relatively quickly. The reason that this has not happened, the reason the electric war campaign has failed to date to be as effective as it should have been, is that President Putin made restrictions on targets, just as Arun has just said, put brakes on the electric war campaign, on the general staff's targeting. The brakes came off, or at least I should say, the president's brakes came off, and the Oreshnik was fired, but not only at a Ukrainian target. That storage has been storing European gas for use in Europe. So not only was the Oreshnik used to destroy a major resource for heating, electricity generation, light, and so forth in Western Ukraine, which is where the regime will retreat to when Kiev capitulates, it was an attack on a European target. The signal is Russia will not broaden the battlefield outside the Ukraine and trigger a NATO Article 5 fight with any European state. On the contrary, it's going to focus on one battlefield at a time, but destroy all European and American assets in and on the Ukraine battlefield, first. Second, to reverse the attrition war, Russia must capture the clock. And then we can go to the issues of what these things mean in Indian terms in a minute. The Europeans think Trump has said he thinks. There's no doubt the US decision-making elites, both military and civilian, think Russia's economy is in a bad state. By increasing the pressure on external trade, by reducing the revenues available to invest in the battlefield, by encouraging, both by information warfare and other means, internal division. This consensus is Russia can be destroyed from within. The will to win battlefield at a time can be destroyed. That's the calculation. What Russia has to do is to say, you think you can wage attrition war against us this way, that you got control of the clock. The Russian answer is, we will have to recover control of the clock. The longer you go on fighting, as Germany, France, Britain have all agreed, plus the United States, to go on fighting in the Ukraine, the worse your defeat will be, the more divided you will be in looking at and compensating for the outcomes. Now, the Russian view is, and has been, that Trump could be divided from the Europeans. That has been termed in a phrase often used, the Anchorage understandings. The view was that President Putin reached understandings in the summit meeting in Alaska in August and want to hold Trump to fulfill those understandings. One would think now the conclusion's obvious. There are no Anchorage understandings left, but the opportunity to deter Trump from losing a war remains. So the Oreshnik has been used in such a way as to threaten Americans, Germans, French, whoever occupies war-making positions in the Ukraine with total destruction. And one thing's very clear from the internal politics. Internal politics can be played back at the United States, just as the United States aimed to play internal politics against India, against Russia, and so on. Trump has gained less than 1 percentage point approval rating for what he's done in Venezuela. He goes into a midterm election campaign with no improvement on public approval. He's having to withdraw troops from the Democrat voting cities, which he thought he could militarize and damage the Democratic vote majorities in Portland, Oregon, and Los Angeles, California, and so forth and so on. The retreat internally is such that Trump must be deterred by the prospect of a significant battlefield loss. And that's what the Oreshnik means. The Europeans equally have to be deterred and encouraged to split. We can already see, not just from a Russian point of view, a significant split between France and Germany. The French, for obvious reasons, like the Russians, do not want to see a remilitarized Germany, of German military expansion following the whatever happens on the Ukrainian battlefield. That simply means, from a Russian point of view, if the one battlefield now can be won more quickly, terms of pause can be reached with the US, with the French, with the Germans, as the longer war against Russia will go on. That's the war in which Poland is engaged, Finland is engaged, Sweden is engaged. They're all engaged in the same enterprise as Trump, except that Trump thinks he's making money at it. Okay? So the way to recover escalation control is not simply the use of weapons against which the West have no defenses. The Oreshnik has to signal not only military capitulation on the part of the target, but political change that deters. It's one element that I invite you to think about. The second you've already touched on, the propaganda warfare that the US wages in India in Russia against
The
Venezuela,
regime.
all these countries. Information warfare, propaganda warfare, is a method for stimulating internal dissent, the destruction of internal consensus. And we've seen it in India with the statement of Commerce Secretary Lutnick trying to diminish the way in which the tariff negotiation was conducted, so as to imply that Prime Minister Modi had to kowtow. Kowtow, as Arun has said, it is inconceivable and wrong and impossible. But the propaganda warfare element of Lutnick's statement or Trump's statement about the Apache helicopters, these are not simply lies. They're made to damage the credibility of Prime Minister Modi and the government of India in India. Now, just look at the Russian approach to information warfare. I've written a couple of books about it. I'm not encouraging everybody to go out and buy them because there's lots that's wrong, misguided, misdirected, and misspent about the Russian approach to propaganda. The Times of India published a very effective counter to the lies that Trump told about the Apache helicopter deal making. Okay? But when it was turned into Russian propaganda, that's India RT India, a very significant phrase disappeared. The RT India, which is essentially Russian propaganda aimed at India, replayed the Times of India reporting about what was true and what was false in what Trump said. But I'm just reading it and just to remind everybody, this is the Times of India covering that story said the discrepancy that's between the lie of Trump and the truth reinforces a pattern critics have frequently noted in Trump's public remarks, where numbers are often inflated and timelines simplified to emphasize US leverage or personal involvement. That position disappeared from India RT's version of the truth. That's odd. That's it. Why? The answer is that US propaganda warfare, when confronted by Russian information warfare, succeeds against the Russians because the organizations like RT caught in a faction fight in Moscow between those who want to make a deal with the United States, a business deal, return business as usual, and so forth. The Kirill Dmitriev line that we've been talking about, the Dmitriev-Vitkov negotiation we've been talking about. The Russian state media, particularly RT, are inclined to accept that and can't, therefore, take a line that the Times of India took. And it's a tiny example, but there are many, many examples of the way in which India has to come up with a better information warfare strategy than the Russians can. On the other hand, Russia's come up with a military solution, but only one battlefield at a time. So were we to get into the details of what can be done, we'd be talking about operations that haven't happened yet. And I don't think any of us are going to talk about that, are we? On the other hand, the principles here are one battlefield at a time, where you can inflict the prospect of loss on the Trump administration it can't accept for its own internal political reasons. And second, a better approach, a more effective approach to information warfare that reinforces internal consensus, not encourages internal division.
Thanks a lot. I think yeah, sir, all yours. Your views, sir.
No, okay, sorry. No, I thank you, John, for this fascinating proposition of both one battle at a time and capturing the clock. It has got a tremendous, from my thinking, a tremendous opportunity and an idea. This is an idea that India should look at very closely. What does the Indian version of one battle at a time means? If you look at the geopolitical scenario globally, is that we have today one power which is trying to undermine us in multiple ways, politically, economically, in geopolitical terms, and that is the United States. It is practically at a war of sorts with India. So when we're looking at one battle at a time with consideration or a thinking, it's important for us to look at how do we deal with our other challenges. Is there a scope to fight multiple battles at all times? The scenario for India right now is this. In security terms, we continue to have a major serious challenge from China as well as Pakistan. And we have a new element of challenge coming up in Bangladesh. But at this juncture, from India's growth story, India's India's technological development, for developing India's comprehensive national power, we need to move away from securitized dimension of our challenges to an economic, political, and trade challenges. And if that be the thing, is there a scope for reorienting our thinking or reorienting our approach in towards both towards the other two players who are important in this scenario, i.e., China and Russia? Uh, Headlines indicate today, as we go towards the national budget, there is economic opening up being considered for the Chinese on a set piece battle, well, let's put it this way, a reciprocal battle. But the whole idea is that there is a reorientation thinking. That's a good sign. We are going in for multiple trade arrangements. So we are also, there is a thought of trying to create, are India joining CTPP or India becoming, creating a new trade and economic arrangements with other major powers players in Asia, i.e., uh, Japan, Korea, Tokyo, ASEAN, etc. So, issue is for India to start looking seriously in dealing with this aspect at this particular juncture. That is one front at a time. And at today, from Indian perspective, the way I look at it, following your analogy, is that the front for us is economic trade and less of security. So, which also means is we recalibrate our security thinking whether we are, well, let's put it this way, a troublesome neighbors. The second point is capture the clock, which also means is time is on your time or bide your time. And what we means is biding your time is, like I was trying to say earlier, develop internally, develop capacities, develop leverages, invest in technologies, upgrade your administrative systems which do not take years to fructify. Be on your feet, think on your feet, and push projects. Something I was reading today, very interesting thing, is the Larsen and Toubro has created a new PMO in India in 2 years. Can you imagine a company has making a huge buildings with all their intricacies of security, etc., in 2 years? We can do it if we want to do it. We have a huge Atmanirbhar programs coming up. We have huge investments coming up in large number of technologically advanced areas. The idea is not to get into who, west, or what. The idea is to get the job done. I'll give you another example. What has Pakistan done by creating a chief of defense force? Is there not enough understanding of this single step which the Pakistanis have taken. They have created an integrated force structure at the highest level, permeating into every sphere of the threat scenario. And whereas the decision making has become so simpler and linear, and as to assuage the feelings of the other two services, they have made them also field marshals, equivalents, that the chief of the air staff, the chief of naval staff. So what have they done? They have created an integrated command structure to deal with India. We are still struggling in that arena. We are still having debates in this arena. We need to create, if you're looking at security, we are looking to create what I would call a multi-domain deterrence and war fighting strategy. It's not alone to have war fighting. We must have create a multi-domain deterrence and war fighting strategy where technologies and systems define the security dynamics and not platforms. So I think what you have, William, from my perspective, I think what you've given me is two very interesting insights, which I think I will like to develop as I go along, both in terms of one battle at a time and capture the clock. And India needs to do that uh, in its own manner. I've just given some ideas and suggestions, but India needs to do that and 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 consolidate itself, create leverages to deal with the futures, which is going to be a huge amount of troublesome future, turbulent future, and we have to navigate that. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot to both of you for putting things in perspective as to how things are going to pan out in future. Like, I would like to end this on a positive note. Things are not as tough as they seem. The new imperial master of the earth, as America and Mr. Trump are posing themselves, have huge internal problems. You know, when you create a position of this kind, extreme position, something opposite always happens. And actually, it's happening. And that manifestation is in India. It's only that we have to start seeing it. Much as what Mr. Trump has positioned himself against India, what vitriol he's spewed, he or Lutnick or for that matter Besant have spoken, a lot of untruths, fuzzy timelines, a lot of hyped up numbers or diminished numbers is one part of the story. It indicates that the India US trade relationship and the strategic relationship will be on rocky roads. It will not be on rocky roads, it doesn't exist anymore. But on the other hand, there is something else happening in India, and that is an assured amount of $72 billion investment into the Indian, business scene, IT, whatever new technologies, everything coming from Business Incorporated of USA. To the extent that Amazon is investing $30 billion into, India over the next 5 years, and this is planned investment over the next 5 years. Uh, Microsoft is putting $17 billion. Google is putting $5 billion, and I could go on. The rest make up. I think I already accounted for 52. There are about 8-10 firms.
67, you're right. The total figure is 67 billion.
67. This is committed. This is committed. This is for the next 5 years. And this makes, this famed CPEC and China's BRI look like actually chicken feed. The BRI is just twice this in terms of outlay. There's something which has gone under the carpet. So I like what John says, the circle of time. The circle of time is on our side. And one battlefield at a time is also on our side. And this is something which we have to realize. And in this, like what Brigadier Sahgal has said, we have to turn to China for certain issues. We'll turn to China for certain issues selectively. But that is also not very great. The requirement of that turning around is something which I don't see much value in. It will not go far, given the fact that China has its own ways of doing things, which no one in India likes. But the thing which I am really worried about is the India-Russia equation. India-Russia equation has stood the test of time. Is it fraying? That's the question I leave with all of you, both of you. I wouldn't like it to fray because that's the only hedge we have against USA for a century, nearly a century or so. So we leave it at that because, like I said, we've always had good equations with Russia. Uh, the the petroleum part of that equation or the crude oil part of that equation is coming under stress. Uh, the supply of engines to Pakistan through the JF-17 deal, whether it's through China or this thing, is a matter of concern for India. Let's not shy away from it. So this is something which Russia also has to rethink, and we'll see how things go on. And lastly, like I said, Iran is one
Yeah, Iran
domino.
is simply.
It's a domino which we don't know how it's going to fall and how it's going to spread. For India, it might open up a lot of opportunities. Whichever way I see the Iran domino falls is good news for India. Because if Iran even goes towards USA, it still has to stabilize. Its stabilization, it will look to India, which means the Chabahar port comes into our orbit, and it opens up the north-south transit corridor to Russia back. So again, Russia has to come into play. I'm hopeful. I do hope some amount of better sense prevails in Russia because I'm sure there are issues which Russia has to consider internally and sees the larger picture. Yeah, I think for all our viewers who have gone on this conversation, we've touched a lot of points. For many of you, you might see that the horizon is dark, but please remember, behind every dark horizon, there's something good also. We've just right, and that's what I've outlined for Indians. Russia has to find that horizon where it wants to go. I think Russia is in a bit of a spot. I'll leave all of you with these thoughts. Uh, in the end, I want your concluding thoughts, John, and then followed by Brigadier Sahgal, and we'll then close it up. Your concluding thoughts, John.
I think you've said it, both of you have summarized it very well. And I think that the only addition I have to add is that in many ways, Ravi, this is a podcast that demonstrates how to wage information warfare against the adversary. It's not simply a case of telling the truth, which is very important and fundamental and being believed.
Don't have to.
The second part is to combat the negative information warfare that's waged by the adversary. And that requires the kind of expertise that you provide, the Indian audience. But at the same time, we have to understand that information warfare is also what we're trying to do. And it's a battlefield. It's one of the other battlefields in which we're engaged. And it's one of the ways in which one reverses the other side's, the enemy, the adversary's narrative, which in turn destroys internal cohesion. That's a level of cooperation that has really not been fully developed between India and Russia, between India, Russia, and China. And I hope that this kind of discussion, without getting into all of the options that make it possible to increase the number of battlefields the other side must fight at the same time and risk being defeated one at a time. Each of us must come up with the battlefield which we think is the best prospect for winning, because winning on one battlefield deters the adversary from trying on all their battlefields. And information warfare is an ongoing battlefield. And I think we've got to do our best to soldier on. You're generals and I'm just a reporter, but we're soldiering on this battlefield. And I hope our audience feels stimulated to continue the fight.
Thanks. Arun, sir.
I have said what I had to say, but I just like to say, I also like to echo what John said. One battlefield at a time. We have to define that battle. India has to define that battle and put all our resources at winning that battle, because winning one, and part of that battle we are already trying to win is by not scumbing, by holding ourselves, ensuring that we expand alternatives. And my last point is, just as a matter of interest, Ravi, Russians have always given RD 93 engines to Pakistan. But what is worrisome is the RD 93 improved version is being given. So that is the real worry. And last point is, there is a new alignment which is also being created in the West Asia, which also requires our attention. And that alignment is Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and now Turkey also wanting to join as part of the defense pact. So something which we will talk about in future discussions. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity.
Yeah, thanks a lot, sirs. We've had a tremendous amount of discussion and a whole lot of things, and we gone on to the fact that a lot of information war is around and based on truths, half truths, and everything. I'll leave you all with a thought. You know, truth has its own power. It has got its own merit. That's why they in our scriptures they say Satyameva Jayate. The truth always wins. And the power of truth destroys information warfare. I leave you with this thought. Thanks a lot, Dr. John, and Brigadier
Thank you.
Sahgal, and thanks to everyone to listen. Till next time, have a great day.
Thank you,
Thank
sir.
you.
Thank you.